faithfully sharing value, exploring great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're discussing the book Hope in Hell, subtitled The Story of Doctors Without Borders. Do you know about Médecins Sans Frontières? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Médecins Sans Frontières, abbreviated as MSF, was founded in 1971 and is the world's largest independent humanitarian medical relief group. Crispin put madness. When conflicts erupt and other groups evacuate, MSF heads in to carry out emergency missions. In disease-stricken refugee camps, MSF brings essential food, water, and medical help. They face wars and disasters and sometimes have to deal with racists, killers, negotiators, and assassins. In 1999, MSF won the Nobel Peace Prize, with members working globally, helping the forgotten in crises, not just with medical aid, but restoring dignity and rights. So they're called Hope in Hell. So, what's it like working for MSF? How does witnessing death and suffering affect them? This book will cover it all. The author, Dan Patolity, is a Canadian journalist and writer who worked in North American media and is now an investment advisor. Since 2002, he's done over 100 interviews with MSF members, scholars, and observers. He also visited MSF teams in places like Angola, Afghanistan, and Haiti, gathering firsthand stories. First published in 2004, it's been revised several times. The book has 10 chapters covering all aspects of MSF's work and their challenges and crises. Next, I'll break down the key points into 3 parts. First, what does MSF do? Second, what's the experience of working with MSF? Third, what problems and challenges does MSF face? All right, let's start with part 1, what MSF does. On December 20th, 1971, MSF was founded in France by Bernard Kouchner, a young French gastroenterologist. Oh, he joined the Red Cross for medical relief in Nigeria back in 1968. After returning to France, Kouchner broke the Red Cross's neutrality rule, formed a committee to raise awareness about the humanitarian crisis in Nigeria. Around the same time, journalists led by Raymond Borrell called on doctors to help victims of earthquakes and floods. In 1971, the two groups merged into Médecins Sans Frontières, a name inspired by Paris's intellectual atmosphere then. Starting in the 1950s, former European colonies declared independence, one after another. For Kouchner and Hopeful, borders meant oppression, while borderlessness symbolized their dream of a new world order. MSF steps into war zones, famines, and disasters worldwide to provide timely medical aid. MSF's early emergency projects were small and had limited impact. In 1976, 5 years after founding, MSF sent a 56-person medical team to war-torn Beirut for their first major field mission. This boosted MSF's reputation in France and abroad. Time magazine hailed it as an extraordinary organization. A 1989 French poll showed that 32% of French citizens wanted to work for MSF. In the 1980s, MSF added offices in Belgium, Switzerland, Netherlands, and expanded to North America in the 1990s, and to nations in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. Today, MSF's global HQ is in Geneva, Switzerland, with operations centers in Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, Barcelona. Other branches are under one center, e.g. U.S. branch under Paris, Canada under Amsterdam. Each field mission is managed by an ops center with high autonomy. The international board doesn't boss them around. Branches often clash over trivial things, seeming inefficient, but decentralization has benefits. Austin Davis, former head of MSF Netherlands, believes having many small teams tackle crises instead of one big group yields better results through varied experiments. When the crisis hits somewhere, different branches often send out aid teams. Sometimes authorities might kick out one branch but let another stay. For instance, in 2009, the International Criminal Court charged then Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir with crimes against humanity and issued an arrest warrant. He then accused international aid groups in Sudan of colluding with the ICC. Miss F's French and Dutch branches, along with over a dozen other NGOs, were expelled from Sudan, but the Belgian branch stayed. Among all MSF missions, providing life-saving aid in conflict zones is undoubtedly the most high-profile. In 2003, General Surgeon Gary Myers went to Liberia during its civil war for a month-long emergency mission. He performed a tracheotomy within 10 minutes of arriving. The victim had been shot in the neck. In 2002, American surgeon Bruce Frank rushed to aid Bouaké, a city in central Côte d'Ivoire. About two-thirds of residents had evacuated. French troops set up a ceasefire line nearby, and for 5 weeks Frank worked non-stop performing emergency surgeries. There were 40 to 50 cases just from AK-47 gunshot wounds.
Past many high-speed car crash victims. Local teens wandered around the hospital with guns, not even knowing if the safeties were on or off.
Frank wondered why they could bring guns into the hospital, and always suspected he might get shot, but they were too busy and short-staffed to worry about it. Frank later recalled, "I've never lived through days like that, working around the clock nonstop." In many places, doctors had to rely on personal experience instead of advanced equipment to save lives, since they had no fancy gear and made do with whatever was at hand. In 1995, nurse Christine Dolly lit a half-broken kerosene stove to sterilize surgical tools in Chechnya. And a newly arrived Danish nurse thought this was insane. But within days, that Danish nurse was doing the same thing. Besides life-saving aid in conflict zones, MSF also provides medical care in refugee camps. They set up nutrition centers in famine-stricken areas to treat malnourished children, elderly, pregnant women, and nursing mothers. In just 1998, nutrition centers set up by MSF and other groups in Sudan saved tens of thousands of lives. Moreover, MSF goes deep into remote areas to establish small medical outposts, and its Essential Medicines for All campaign aims to help developing countries access basic medicines for diseases like malaria. To accomplish these missions, MSF needs far more than just doctors. In fact, only a quarter of MSF's field staff are doctors. Nearly half have no medical background. Lifesavers aren't necessarily medics. They might be water and sanitation engineers. They drill wells, dig latrines, and provide safe water and sanitation for teams and locals, which often significantly reduces infectious disease spread. Field personnel also include project coordinators who manage team activities, hire locals, and implement safety measures. They're often social experts who build rapport with local leaders. One coordinator told the author, "When a rebel and the community both know me, someone who understands exactly what we do and appreciates it, that gives us security." Miss SF's logisticians are legendary. They come from diverse backgrounds: mechanics, ship captains, construction workers, tourism workers, tree planters. Great logisticians know a little about everything. Quick thinking and resourceful, they fix generators, install satellite phones, hunt rare medicines, or turn empty warehouses into fully functional hospitals. For emergencies, MSF's European logistics hubs provide pre-packed supplies deliverable anywhere worldwide within 48 hours. For earthquakes, teams can order disaster kits, each containing medical supplies to treat 1,000 minor injuries. If cholera breaks out in a refugee camp, a standard cholera kit contains medicine for 625 patients. Funding mainly comes from public donations. For example, in 2008, MSF raised nearly $960 million. Modest for its scale, but only 10% came from the UN, EU Commission, or local governments. And these places are the primary funding sources for most other aid agencies. MSF believes relying on UN and government donations would institutionalize aid groups and make them reluctant to criticize their benefactors, while depending mainly on public donations allows MSF to maintain independence in operations. Former MSF Netherlands head Austin Davis said, "We do what we want, but game to keep critical analysis active so we can speak out when they mess up." So now we've covered what MSF does and how it operates. Then what kind of people does MSF need? What's it like working for them? Part 2 focuses on MSF seeking multilingual people. French or English are essential. They also look for those who've worked or traveled in developing countries. Resort-only vacations don't count. Additionally, doctors usually need 2 years of experience, sometimes relaxed to 1 year. MSF covers all travel costs for field staff, provides health insurance, and modest stipends. But field workers pay their own meals and local expenses. Office salaries aren't high either. Thus, MSF attracts many who aren't obsessed with material comforts. Martin Gerard holds a master's in political science, speaks 3 languages fluently, visited over 20 countries, and did missions with MSF in Sierra Leone and Colombia. He said, I'm 40, no car. My parents bought my washer dryer because I couldn't afford it. But if I sent my resume to the UN, I'd surely land a job paying at least $5,000 monthly. Yet I know I'd lose part of my soul in big political machines. Plus, adaptability is crucial, because members might get sudden notice to leave home for weeks or months. NSF field staff average age 37. Many are quite young, since aid work mainly attracts singles without children. After 35, many choose less risky work or move from field missions to offices. So, what motivates them to join MSF? Some join because of a book or admired doctor. Others seek new professional challenges. For instance, in Western countries, general practitioners refer patients to specialists rather than trying unfamiliar treatments themselves. Good for patients, but less fulfilling for doctors. In rescue work, doctors must push their limits to do things they've never done before, learning a lot in the process.
Not only doctors are drawn to challenges, but non-medical staff too.
A manager recalls his first mission to Somalia at age 25, sitting down for meetings with the UN and military.
He says, every day is different. Some days are absolutely incredible.
Back then, I achieved many things I never thought I could do. However, MSF recruiters carefully avoid hiring thrill seekers who just want to see bullets fly in war zones. They're the most dangerous for any team. Those with overly romanticized views of humanitarian work also face harsh realities. Martin Gerard, who recruited for the Montreal office, had 1 or 2 yuppies come in saying, I've made enough money, have a big house, but my life is a mess. If I go on a mission with you, I think I'll find meaning in life. Gerard asked them, if I send you to a genocide scene, would you be happier?
Do you think after coming back, you'll smile at the sun every morning?
In 1994, our staff sent to Rwanda still see a psychiatrist weekly to this day.
James Orbinsky is MSF's former international president, accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for MSF, and witnessed the Rwandan genocide firsthand.
Starting in April 1994, Hutu extremists carried out organized massacres against the Tutsi and moderate Hutus, killing 800,000 to 1 million people, 1/8 of the population. Orbinsky once tried to negotiate with a Hutu commander to release a group of Tutsi children. The children were trapped in a building. The commander looked at Orbinsky and said, "These are insects and will be crushed like insects." The next day, Orbinsky returned to the building. The children had been hacked to death, their bodies covered with a blue tarp. For about 1.5 years after that, Orbinsky suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. While driving, every blue vehicle passing by made him constantly recall that tarp. But in 1996, he went to Zaire to serve Rwandan refugees there. To help newcomers handle field complexities, MSF provides training covering organizational principles and practical skills. And like changing car tires, using UHF radios, and stress management techniques.
Nurse Catherine Bosler trained in Amsterdam before going to Afghanistan.
On the first night at 10 p.m., she and other trainees were dropped in a Dutch forest. Boston had a map, compass, large tarp, and poles. Their task was finding a red dot to build a latrine, only finishing by 5 a.m. The entire period, they learned radio communication. Bosler said they didn't teach specifics, just showed how frustrating field coordination can be. But training differs from reality. Rampant violence, scarce meds, watching patients die. All these realities bring frustration, despair, and helplessness. Pediatric ER doctor Joanne Liu dreamed of joining MSF at 13. At 30, she finally did her first mission in Mauritania.
Joanne recalled UN officials moving refugees to Mali during rainy season without enough plastic sheets, leaving them exposed for 2 weeks, triggering dysentery and respiratory outbreaks.
Joanne felt officials gambled with 40,000 refugees' health just to get them near borders faster, and MSF did nothing to resist.
Yet her supervisor told her, "Wake up, Joanne. Welcome to the real world." This crushed her, making her swear off future missions. In Côte d'Ivoire, despite Dr. Frank operating desperately, some salvageable patients died, like a man with a ruptured liver and broken femur who arrived in shock after a car crash.
Frank rushed him to OR, opened his abdomen, but had no one to assist with the surgery.
Finally, someone who cleaned post-surgery was sent in, but he couldn't help at all. The patient died on the operating table. Frank was utterly devastated, but many persist despite such frustrations, like Joanne, who went on over a dozen MSF missions. With experience, they recognize their limits and how small their impact is in the grand scheme. Almost no field veterans boast about their missions or how successful they were. Usually, they'll reluctantly admit helping some people and saving a few lives. Nurse Carol McMack, after returning from Burundi's war zone, still sees her patients when she closes her eyes. She says, "I feel so useless I couldn't change anything. Maybe made small differences, but I couldn't transform those medical centers." Yet returning home, they often find missions simpler than reintegration. Logistic Peter Lauber spent 9 months in desolate Azerbaijan. Back in California, smooth roads and instant hot water felt miraculous, truly miraculous. In supermarket produce sections, the variety of apples made his jaw drop. Right after missions, Lauber became terribly difficult to be around. So he'd take his sleeping bag and books, riding his motorcycle for weeks to relearn civility. During training, Lauber heard a joke called new refrigerator syndrome. It's when you sit at dinner wanting to share about corpses in decay, but your mom says, "Oh, did I mention we bought a new fridge?" For MSF members, this disconnect from loved ones is the hardest homecoming challenge. At parties, everyone wants stories and photos. But within minutes, listeners drift off, thinking about grabbing more shrimp. Italian Maximiliano Cacci survived Liberia's civil war, South Sudan, and being trapped in a rebel-controlled plane. He said after his first mission back home, friends were genuinely interested and asked many questions. But after Cacci completed several missions, friends still asked the same questions.
So Cocky realized friends didn't truly grasp his reality. Their questions remained vague.
Koki believed it wasn't lack of intelligence or interest. They were just too removed from those realities. On TV, you can't smell the blood, nor the sweat of a man who fled all night. Can't smell refugee camps. So after 4 or 5 years, Kochi stopped wanting to return to Europe. American Lauber, back from Nigeria, tried telling his family about conflicts there. People putting tires on heads, the unimaginable Lagos slums. Lauber's mother said, "How extraordinary. By the way, did I mention we bought a new refrigerator?" Lauber was stunned. He thought those MSF folks were absolutely right. For returning doctors and nurses, readjusting to home healthcare systems is another challenge. In developing countries, they daily saw patients walking hours to clinics, only to be too ill to save. While back home, waiting rooms fill with sniffly patients or self-important parents rushing doctors for their next appointment.
Canadian nurse Liam Olson said sometimes he had to bite his tongue to avoid outbursts.
You know you have world-class free healthcare, so shut your mouth!
So far, we've covered expatriate staff experiences at MSF. That local staff vastly outnumber foreigners at rescue sites. In 2008, about 22,000 full-time locals worked MSF projects versus just 2,000 expatriates. Most field work is done by these local employees. In some cases, foreign medics rarely treat patients directly, focusing instead on supervision, training, and management. A project's success often hinges on local staff quality. They understand both local politics and how to conduct medical operations. Western medical staff learn about malaria, measles, typhoid, and diphtheria from textbooks, but local employees have firsthand experience. Canadian OBGYN Wendy Lai said, "Local staff diagnose and treat these diseases better than I do." Dr. Lai served missions in Congo and Haiti. Nurse Liam Olson added, "We underestimate local staff's diagnostic skills. They tell me when cases need emergency surgery. Working with them taught me so much." In 1999, MSF received the Nobel Peace Prize for outstanding humanitarian contributions. But since its 1971 founding, MSF and its members have faced constant challenges. Part 3 details these, focusing on two key issues. First being security risks. A 2000 UK study examined 735 humanitarian worker deaths, expats or locals, in the 80s and 90s, 68% from shootings, explosions, or landmines. Only 17% died in accidents. Murdered expats averaged 40 years old, meaning they weren't novices. Carelessness rarely caused deaths.
Another U.S. study found nearly half of accidental deaths occurred during rebel or bandit vehicle ambushes.
MSF staff follow strict protocols. In most African countries, hit an animal or person, keep driving, only stop after reporting to authorities. Even if you're a doctor, don't stop to help. This seems against humanitarian principles. But it's necessary. In 2003, British doctors Rachel Stowe and Gus Augustus hit a girl while returning from Rwanda to northern Angola. When they stopped, Augustus was dragged out and beaten to death by a mob. Stowe escaped by car, her assistant on foot. Additionally, for conflict zones like Angola during civil war, MSF has extra rules. Never stay out overnight without transport on standby. Always carry $50. This money serves as emergency ransom if extorted or kidnapped. All members receive landmine training. Drivers must follow vehicle tracks and never leave main roads. If stopping roadside to urinate, do it behind the vehicle. Following protocols doesn't guarantee absolute safety. In 2002, MSF members went to a village in southeastern Angola to vaccinate against measles. That night, returning the same route, a vehicle's rear tire triggered an anti-tank mine, killing 7. But sometimes strong community ties save lives. In 2001, Kenny Gluck, head of MSF Holland's North Caucasus mission, was kidnapped in Chechnya. Violence was rampant in Chechnya then. Expatriates weren't spared. For example, in 1996, 6 Red Cross workers were shot dead in their sleep by masked gunmen.
Finding perpetrators or kidnappers was extremely difficult.
Because kidnappers usually didn't demand ransoms, they never negotiated. 50 or 60 militant groups operated there with complex interrelations. After Gluck's kidnapping, MSF got no messages. Leads vanished. Gluck himself had no idea why he was taken. His local reputation saved him.
Gluck!
In Chechnya, he had many friends. All Chechen doctors knew him. These doctors contacted networks. Even criminals who did kidnappings often got injured
And needed Chechen doctors' help.
so doctors had to say ethically questionable things. Your mother or cousin was treated at an MSF clinic using medicine Kenny personally brought. How could you do this? If this continues, I won't treat your men anymore. The Chechen doctor's intervention worked. Initially, Gluck was shoved into a filthy cellar, too low to stand. Just a mattress beside cabbages, onions, and carrots. 9 or 10 days later, he was moved to a normal room. The kidnappers politely asked what he wanted to eat, assuring him there was nothing to fear. After nearly a month in captivity, Gluck was released. His captors returned his passport and $700 cash, even apologizing profusely for losing his cheap watch. Most MSF field workers haven't faced kidnapping or violence themselves, but know colleagues who have. Many contract malaria or fevers on missions and face HIV risks. They're psychologically prepared for these occupational hazards. What they refuse to accept is the rising violence targeting aid workers, kidnappings and executions increasing recently. Many believe some countries deliberately portray relief groups as allies, making them targets. Faithfully sharing value, exploring great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're discussing the book Hope in Hell, subtitled The Story of Doctors Without Borders. Do you know about Médecins Sans Frontières? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Médecins Sans Frontières, abbreviated as MSF, was founded in 1971 and is the world's largest independent humanitarian medical relief group. When conflicts erupt and other groups evacuate, MSF heads in to carry out emergency missions. In disease-stricken refugee camps, MSF brings essential food, water, and medical help. They face wars and disasters, and sometimes have to deal with racists, killers, negotiators, and assassins. In 1999, MSF won the Nobel Peace Prize, with members working globally, helping the forgotten in crises, not just with medical aid, but restoring dignity and rights. So they're called Hope in Hell. So what's it like working for MSF? How does witnessing death and suffering affect them? This book will cover it all. The author, Dan Patolity, is a Canadian journalist and writer who worked in North American media and is now an investment advisor. Since 2002, he's done over 100 interviews with MSF members, scholars, and observers. He also visited MSF teams in places like Angola, Afghanistan, and Haiti, gathering firsthand stories. First published in 2004, it's been revised several times. The book has 10 chapters, covering all aspects of MSF's work and their challenges and crises. Next, I'll break down the key points into 3 parts. First, what does MSF do? Second, what's the experience of working with MSF? Third, what problems and challenges does MSF face? All right, let's start with part 1, what MSF does. On December 20th, 1971, MSF was founded in France by Bernard Kouchner, a young French gastroenterologist. In 1968, he joined the Red Cross for medical relief in Nigeria. After returning to France, Kouchner broke the Red Cross's neutrality rule, formed a committee to raise awareness about Nigeria's humanitarian crisis. Around the same time, journalists led by Raymond Borel called on doctors to help earthquake and flood victims. In 1971, the two groups merged into Médecins Sans Frontières, a name reflecting Paris's intellectual atmosphere. Since the 1950s, former European colonies declared independence one after another. For Kouchner's group, borders meant oppression, while borderlessness symbolized their dream of a new world order. This organization enters war zones, famines, and disasters worldwide to provide timely medical aid. Miss SF's early emergency projects were small with limited impact. In 1976, 5 years after founding, MSF sent a 56-person medical team to war-torn Beirut, their first major field mission. This boosted MSF's reputation in France and internationally. Time magazine hailed it as an extraordinary organization.
A 1989 French poll showed 32% of French citizens wanted to work for MSF.
In the 1980s, MSF added offices in Belgium, Switzerland, Netherlands, and expanded to North America in the 1990s.
And to nations in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania.
Today, MSF's global HQ is in Geneva, Switzerland, with operation centers in Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, Barcelona. Other branches report to one center, for example, US to Paris, Canada to Amsterdam. Each field mission is managed by an ops center with significant autonomy. The international board doesn't dictate to them. Branches often clash over trivial matters, seeming inefficient, but decentralization has advantages. Austin Davis, former head of MSF Netherlands, believes having many small teams navigate crises, experimenting differently, yields better results than one large group. When a crisis hits, different branches often send aid teams. Sometimes authorities expel one branch but let another stay. For example, in 2009, when the ICC charged Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir with crimes against humanity, he accused aid groups in Sudan of colluding with the court. MSF's French and Dutch branches, plus over a dozen NGOs, were expelled from Sudan, but the Belgian branch remained. Among MSF missions, providing life-saving aid in conflict zones is undoubtedly the most high-profile. In 2003, General Surgeon Gary Myers went to war-torn Liberia on emergency duty. Within 10 minutes of arrival, he performed a tracheotomy. The victim had been shot in the neck. In 2002, American surgeon Bruce Frank rushed to aid Bouaké in central Côte d'Ivoire. About two-thirds of residents had evacuated. French troops established a ceasefire line nearby, and Frank worked non-stop performing emergency surgeries for 5 weeks. There were 40 to 50 cases just from AK-47 gunshot wounds.
Plus many high-speed crash victims. Local teens roamed the hospital with guns, unaware if safeties were on or off.
Frank questioned why guns were allowed in hospitals and constantly feared being shot, but they were too busy and understaffed to address it. Frank later recalled, "I've never lived through days like that, working around the clock nonstop." In many places, doctors had to rely on personal experience instead of advanced equipment to save lives, since they had no fancy gear and made do with whatever was at hand. In 1995, Nurse Christine Dolly lit a half-broken kerosene stove to sterilize surgical tools in Chechnya, and